right, I think that we are live on Facebook. I am so excited to be here this morning with my friend and incredible naturopathic doctor, Dr. Tayor Bean. I'm so excited to hear a little bit about you and what you do, and then start talking a little bit about vaccinations, which I know is a very controversial topic. But once I had a conversation with you, I wanted to know more. And that was a really interesting thing because I thought I'd made up my mind. And I'd like to just hear a little bit more about what you do and why you've become so passionate about this.
Of course. So I've been a naturopathic doctor since about 2014. I graduated in 2012, but moved overseas when I graduated to Dubai, and then we moved to Singapore. And so I started working in Singapore, which has mandated vaccines there. And it really hit home. I mean, I was fresh basically out of school. My training in vaccinations is for any naturopathic medical school is going to be very simple in terms of you learn about the infections that you're vaccinating against, and you learn about the schedule. And that's pretty much it. That is the training around vaccines in naturopathic school. So I had two different situations with new patients who came into my office, and two mothers. One was a lawyer. The other mother was just as incredibly intelligent. And they both said, we've done the vaccines for our children and something seems a bit off. Something seems to be different. We've spoken to our GPs. We've spoken to different specialists. In Singapore, conventional care is incredible. You can see whomever you want, whenever you want. There's really no wait time. So they had done the rounds, they had asked, and no one was giving them any answers. And being a naturopathic doctor, you're going to be an alternative person to speak to about something like this nature. And I didn't have any answers either. And I said, well, I don't know. I don't know what's happening. I don't know how anything would have happened. But they didn't really care to talk to me about if it was a vaccine or not, or what. It was more so, how are you going to fix my child at this point? What are you going to do?
They didn't care what it was. They just wanted to have a healthy child.
I just want a healthy child. I just want what I know, how healthy my child can be, and something has happened and I don't know. So, these scenarios, they can happen. And so it really, as a new doctor and a new mother at the time as well, it really hit home to me. It was this personal experience that was like, okay, well, first off, I don't have an answer. And part of me was quite upset that I didn't have an answer. You want to be able to answer. And I didn't know what to say. And so I was, in fact, embarrassed that I couldn't offer an explanation as to what had happened or why, or what it could be, or what were the events that led to this. And was this just, the trigger? What could possibly happen to your child? So I then went on this course of trying to find answers, to these questions, and potentially what was going on in the body, and then how could we mitigate it, and how could we optimize, and how could we, so being in a country with mandated vaccines, it's not about we're not going to vaccinate. It is we are going to vaccinate, and we're going to optimize the situation for you. So that was my journey. And so we moved back to Canada in 2015, late 2015. And naturopathic doctors in British Columbia, still at that time, had the scope to be able to administer vaccines, and not very many, and still not many offer. It's more so around the logistics of getting a vaccine. But I did the course with the BC CDC, which is the same training that nurses get. And I now offer vaccines in my office. And so
and that's not very typical because of probably the education that you've had as a naturopath, that it's just very limited in that area.
Well, the vaccine training in itself is in general more so you're going to learn a little bit about the immune system. You're going to learn about the infections. You're going to learn about what those infections can do. And then you learn about vaccines and essentially what's available and when you would give them and the combos you give them at, and the difference between a live viral vaccine versus a non-live vaccine, what that means. And then, that's essentially the ballpark of it. And within that training, which I'd already known that this was coming to me, but there is a portion on vaccine training that talks about informed consent and what that means in the realm of vaccination. It's a 7-step process to obtain informed consent from a parent. And a part of that is the opportunity to ask questions. That's number 4. And so, I had been, becoming a mother, you go through all these different points of being even a mother, of where informed consent is very important, or at least being informed of the decision that you want to make. And that is going to be, for obvious reasons, how are you going to labor, at home or in a hospital? If you want an obstetrician or a midwife, do you want a doula? What position should you be in what's best position to be in? If your baby is breech, what can you do? I mean, there's all those, that was the wave that came at me of being informed.
Yeah.
And so that I took that because, when I became pregnant with my first child, I was incredibly scared to give birth naturally. But I knew
fair.
that
That's totally fair, by the way.
Completely fearful of the thought process of birthing a child. But I knew that I didn't want a C-section. So that meant I was birthing the child naturally. I mean, I was very fortunate by going through naturopathic medical school. The obstetrical aspect of our training was by a midwife. And so she is about empowerment and choices. And so I already kind of had that little bit of training of like, okay, I know that I can be in any position to birth. I know that lying on my back is going to be, decrease the ability of my pelvis to open by 30%. And so I knew these pieces. It was like, okay, well, at least I have that. And so that carried with me. And labor empowerment is a big part of my practice, but then that comes around, the discussion of vaccines. And when the biggest part, the reason for me getting into this piece is my experience in Singapore about wanting to optimize the experience of vaccinating, to understanding in its absolute capacity about vaccines, so I could answer any questions, and then have the opportunity to administer them for people that have chosen to vaccinate. And I want to be a part of their team. And I want to be able to answer any of their questions. They've come to me, let's answer your questions. We will do the vaccine. And if there's any reaction, then I mandate in my office to report it. There is a reporting system in place in British Columbia, but it's a passive reporting system, which means you aren't mandated as a practitioner to report it. Other provinces do have that in place, but it can be very difficult to know which vaccine to report. Very difficult because you're going to do many at once.
Right.
So it becomes quite convoluted as to which one should you report. And the training around knowing if it was or wasn't isn't robust. And so, but I think that can be very challenging in terms of, you're going to see a public health nurse, the history of your child or history of you as an adult isn't in its full capacity. Are they going to know? And so you, as a naturopathic doctor, I can spend an hour with you. I know the ins and outs. I know your history. I have it all written down in front of me. And so I can backtrack and say, okay, well, we know that either you reacted to XYZ. I know that you have an allergy to this. I know your family history. I know the medications that you're on. There are some contraindications that's listed even for medications to vaccines. So I know I can really fine tune and know these pieces and put that all together. And And so that care is really difficult in the model that is out there right now. And so, yes, vaccines are going to be explained as safe. They do come with potential adverse reactions, as any pharmaceutical drug to herbal supplement that you take, to supplements, so to IVs that we do. There are risks with anything that we do because we don't know how the body will respond. There is no way of knowing, and that comes with vaccine. We have no idea. The vaccine is to create immune response. And so will that immune response continue? And the vaccines before 12 months are not live. And so in order to activate the immune system to respond, there's an adjuvant in there, which is aluminum. So aluminum is used to heighten that immune response, to get that innate immune system to respond, to then trigger the adaptive side to make antibodies. And that is the process. That is the adjuvant that's been used for over 70 years. And so because it's been used for so long, then there is this longevity of thinking that it is fine and safe. Of course, the quantity has increased. So versus a live viral vaccine doesn't have aluminum in it. It does not. It doesn't have it doesn't need to have anything in it because it's live.
Right.
So that's your MMR, and that's going to be your chickenpox that's given at 12 months.
So sorry, Taylor, to interrupt you. It's funny because for somebody that isn't a doctor or doesn't have a medical background, we know that there's a lot, as a mom, we know that there's a lot of controversy around vaccines. So as a diligent mom, you're going to ask questions. But when I ask questions to my GP, it's safe. When I ask questions to a nurse, it's safe. Is there aluminum in it? No. Like they're not telling the truth. And I think that that's the hard part about all of this is, after speaking with you, I don't feel that I made the most informed decision that I could have made because I wasn't given all the facts. And that may change people's minds if they're, if you're going to take even a antibiotic or a prescription drug and you read all the side effects and you're like, oh, I'd rather chance it and like try and do something different, right? Like than this, you're not even given that for your kid who is under 12 months old. And that to me is a bit terrifying, to be honest.
Right. And I mean, I always, when a lot of my patients, they come in with questions and their decision may not change, because we talk about risk benefit ratio of this is the risk of potentially contracting the infection. We do need to start calling them infections. They're not diseases because they are infections. They come and then they go. Some of these infections have the capability of turning into a disease. So like hepatitis can turn into, so getting hepatitis B can turn into hepatitis and then fulminant, and then you need a liver transplant. So there are, I think it's important is to understand the infection that you are vaccinating for and what are your risks for that. And so we go into that. So of course, being in a plane is a risk because you're breathing the same air as many people. You go to Mexico and hepatitis A is going to be a risk. And so any of those very contagious communicable infections and we talk about. And so how do you contract these infections, I think is also important because people will think, well, some people might think we can create herd immunity to tetanus, for example, which you cannot. It's spore that's in dirt that lives in the guts of cows and on livestock. So just these pieces like, oh, I didn't realize that. You can't catch it from another person. So you can't catch hepatitis B from a person that you're sitting beside. So because of how you get hepatitis B, if you're just sitting beside them, and you can't get HPV from a person that you're just sitting beside.
Right.
So it's a communicable infection, meaning you get it from a human, but it's not contagious. So, it's like how people will talk about HIV, right? And so we went through that wave of understanding HIV. So all of that informed being informed, then you can make that decision of what you want to do. And then, I have, I've had a patient an unvaccinated teenager who's going to New York for a full ride scholarship. And in order to go to university, he needed certain vaccines. So we're doing those vaccines. So there is no choice. I mean, there is a choice. You can either go
Not take the scholarship.
or not take your scholarship.
Yeah.
That's your choice. So, like, let's, sure, here we go. We're going to do those for you. Families have that choice of, their children are unvaccinated and they want to be around family members whom want those children vaccinated. And that is just, either you are going to be around our children or you're not. And so there's these choices. And so I support the families then that okay, well, we're going to get our children vaccinated because they want to be around our families. So we do vaccines. Right. So there's, what you're doing, where do you live, where you're going? Because I have a lot of people that come in to talk about vaccines, usually with, infants, but either older, and they're either just starting to think about it or, they're just have so many questions. And so then I support them through that. And then we either do some that they were already considering. They do that with their public health nurse, or they do that with me.
What kind of questions? Like, because I'm watching the news feed as well while we're live. And so, one of the women said, I didn't even know to ask questions. So many just like people just trust the system. So what questions would you ask? Like as a mom, or dad? Cause one of my friends, Dan, is on here and he's got 2 kids and he's like, I'm interested in this too. Cause I was made to feel crazy for questioning the schedule of the vaccine. So what questions would you ask?
Well, I think I'm always curious. So what is the rate of the infection in our environment, or how many cases was there of pertussis this year? Or what about how many cases of measles were there? And how long will the vaccine work for? Is it lifelong? Is the new research say 20 years? Does it say 6 years now? Because there is always updated information, even on the longevity of how long you have immunity. What are the risks that you've seen, or what are the adverse reactions rather you've seen? What are the risks? And for you, I always suggest is to always read a vaccine insert. That is free for you to do. You can just Google MMR PDF and go ahead and read it, and then that may bring up some questions for you there. So what's in the vaccine, I'd like to know about. How will I know if my child is going to have a reaction or not? Or does family history mean anything?
Yeah.
Because it is a pharmaceutical agent that's used. In terms of, we talk about safety, and, a lot of the new research that comes out in terms of safety, vaccines are compared to other vaccines in terms of safety. And that is how it's done. There have been trials of using placebo, but typically the placebo will be either aluminum or another vaccine. And that information will be on the vaccine insert. It's not hidden. It's there for you to read. And so to understand that, so then you have to go back to the placebo vaccine. Well, what were the adverse reactions to that vaccine when it was used during safety trials? So
sorry, I just want to clarify. If that placebo is being used, you might maybe I'm misunderstanding, but would you not know that you're having it? Like you wouldn't know that they were vaccinating your child with that?
No, you would. No, you would.
Yeah. Okay. You would. You would. And the other thing is, they're vaccinating for chickenpox and measles. And I don't think I was vaccinated for that as a kid. I think they've started to add more vaccinations. I had chickenpox as a kid, and I've heard that actually helps strengthen your immune system as a child. But now we're vaccinating against it. So is there a reason to pro or con to do that?
So the chickenpox vaccine came in, in the 90s. The measles vaccine was licensed in 62, but didn't hit, I think, Canada in the early 70s. So the chickenpox vaccine was created because to help children obviously not get chickenpox, and so that parents wouldn't have to stay home with the child. It's not
interesting.
yeah, it's not a matter of the fact that, well, chickenpox is, it's great. It
Terrible.
creates
Yeah.
all of these things. It's just, we realize that, a lot of children do get it. And so then you're going to have to miss, 5 to 7, 5 days of work to stay home with your child who's very itchy and uncomfortable, because it can be. So there are countries that have opted out of doing chickenpox vaccine, thinking about, well, if we eliminate it, then if we use chickenpox and start eliminating chickenpox within our community, then there won't be reinoculation for the adults, and for the grandparents. And so that may increase shingles as a result of that. So, Europe has been, the UK, for example, has been one that has not been on their list. They're adding it now, but a lot of time after the United States and Canada has used it. So it's there as an option, you can, but it's not implemented per se as part of the regular childhood vaccine schedule.
And sorry, I'm reading some of the questions, so I don't mean to interrupt you, but Michelle says, if you had the chicken pox, you could also get shingles later in life though, as well.
Yeah, you can. Yes, you can. Because it lives dormant. And so this is where keeping your body healthy, because stress is what's going to express it. So yes, of course it does. But then you have to understand, well, what can you do to prevent that? I mean, one of my colleagues got shingles in school. And so
my husband's had it. My husband's had it from stress. Sure,
and it's high time stress. And she got it. It's very uncomfortable. It's not something that you want at all. But it was second year med school. So
from stress,
high time stress. So, it's similar to part of the herpes family. So you get herpes, H1, H2. So anyways.
Yeah. And then the other question is, what are your views on flu vaccines? Because as we know, it's a bit of a guesswork, because they're kind of guessing what's coming, and which strain is likely to be prevalent each winter.
That part I don't. That's so hard to know, because there's the viral shift and drift that happens. So you make what's happening east, and then hopefully by the time it comes to us, it hasn't changed at all. And so this is why the efficacy of the vaccine is going to be much lower than some other vaccines, because it isn't helping, may not help you, because the virus is different at this time. So I have a lot of patients that opt out of doing flu. I mean, as a naturopathic doctor too, I mean, it's about preventative work. It's about optimizing the immune system. It's about what can we do to promote strong and strengthen that immune system, so that if it is around you, that you can deal with it. So I mean, I like to use things with a bit more efficacy. I support patients that want to do the flu vaccine, but I use a lot of antivirals too in my office, and support people that way if they don't want to. So I do find a lot of people choose they're not going to do them. And anecdotally, we'll get information of people who either have done the flu shot and they did get the flu. I don't think we have a good enough, evidence of really, like, every year, let's see who got the flu shot, who got the flu, who didn't get the flu shot, who didn't get the flu, and do some case reports that way, case studies. And so,
but there isn't the data to do that, really.
Data to do that. Yeah.
And so I find it really fascinating, because when I posted yesterday about you being a naturopathic doctor, I got messages, and people assumed that you were anti-vaccine. And so how does that play out in your profession, and how, why did you decide that this was something that you wanted to stand up and talk about? Like, you talk at conferences. Like, I think that you're working with the government on more information that are going to people like us that want to make informed decisions.
It really stems from when someone says to me, I wish I had known that. And how come no one's ever told me that? It really struck a chord with me of, okay, there's a huge gap that's missing here. And I don't know why anyone's not stepping up and dealing with this gap. And I want to try and fill the gap to bridge those two worlds, to bridge those two. There's so much fighting that happens. There's so much anger that's happening, so much fear that's happening. And, there's this huge psychological piece to it that sometimes I don't understand why that is. Like, why are you angry? Why are you angry? Why is this happening? So I'm trying to sort of bridge that. And there's some, inaccuracies in the move in the side of not wanting to vaccinate. And so, and, aspects there that are inaccurate. For example, for formaldehyde, our body makes formaldehyde. So we do process it, to people saying that there's aluminum in MMR vaccine. Well, no, there's not. There's pieces to this whole embodiment that's like, well, I want to be able to answer your question. I want my answers to be accurate. So I'm doing a lot of work to make sure my answers are accurate, and backing that up with, well, this paper said this and this paper said this. And so trying to be very transparent. And I think that when you're not allowed to talk about something, well, people are going to go to the internet to find answers and go on Facebook and go on social groups. And so it's like, well, if you're not going to talk about it, then people are going to go look elsewhere. So therefore we have to be, people are going to be hesitant when you're not allowed to talk about it. Yeah. So let's talk about it. I mean, about any aspect of anything.
I think that's the hard part about society today, right? Is that everyone is too scared to offend somebody or get in an argument instead of having some critical thinking and having a discussion, because it's okay to disagree. Sure. It's absolutely, like, my decision, like, doesn't affect your decision, doesn't affect the person next door, but people think when it comes to vaccines that it does. Right. And that's why I think there's so many debates that go on.
Sure. I mean, the difference with vaccines, of course, is you're vaccinating so your body is primed and ready to deal with the infection that's in the environment, so you don't spread it. And so it's a public health service for us to do vaccines. We need to talk about the other side that goes along with it too. And so if a person has had a reaction, that is important to understand, to talk about, to have sympathy for that, compassion for that, and that part too. It isn't there. And yes, if the reactions are rare, well, those rarities are still very important. Every human is important. Every child is important, and so yes, the very serious adverse reactions can be rare in a large population, but they can still be there. And so that aspect is like, let's just be transparent that those things can happen.
You just need to know. And that's, another really great example is a friend of mine has Guillain-Barré syndrome, and she didn't know until she got to the hospital in labor that she couldn't have an epidural because it could trigger her Guillain-Barré. And is it Jillian or Gillian? Am I saying it right?
The Guillain-Barré syndrome, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So she couldn't have made an informed decision because she wasn't informed. And that's what we want to do, right? Is have these hard discussions, because not everybody is different. Not every health history is different. We're all coming from different backgrounds. And you have to understand that you're making that decision for your child based on your genetics and your health history and things that have happened in your family, not based on what your neighbor thinks or your sister thinks,
Totally. And I'll talk about, have vaccines lower instances of that infection? Yes, they have. For measles, we have the rate of measles infections has declined with the vaccine. The death rate of measles did not decline from before to after, but the instances of measles infections did decline. To Hib, Haemophilus influenza type B, decreasing epiglottitis infections, that did happen. Chickenpox vaccine, yes, we do see less chickenpox since the vaccine has come. So these infections do decline with the vaccine. That is the goal. The goal of vaccines is to decrease the amount of that infection in the environment. And so it is doing that as it's intended goal is occurring. So there are these pieces then that I will discuss. The top things I think are important for families to understand is the infection that you're vaccinating for. And if you can, I mean, so the WHO does have on their website of looking at trends within the year. They do like an annual amount of that infection per year. So you can look at, well, what happened last year and the year before and the year before, if you want to know rates. So there is that piece. The CDC puts out a surveillance of pertussis every year. So they do check. And so you can look at the numbers within the vaccinated, the unvaccinated, the partially vaccinated. Right. So you can see those numbers, which is interesting. I do think surveillance needs to be improved so we know what's happening in our environment, but it can be very difficult, time consuming more so. And, I have kits in my office to be able to swab for pertussis or know if there's Hib to even RSV. Wow. And know, well, what is it that you have? Your cough, is it viral or is it bacterial? Are antibiotics indicated for you or are they not indicated for you? And so I'm trying to really tighten up knowing what infection I'm dealing with rather than like, well, it might just be viral or well, it just might be bacterial. It is.
Yeah, that's kind of important.
But it can be done. You can have swabs for these things so that you know what infection you're dealing with. And then I can report it of like, okay, well, I had 3 instances of pertussis. So maybe we're having a bigger pertussis outbreak. But because pertussis doesn't come with a skin rash like measles, then we don't know what it was and it resolves and goes away and that's it. But I'm even last January, February, March, I had people come in with a cough that had been going on for weeks and weeks. And what's interesting about pertussis, it's known as the 100-day cough. So I'm thinking to myself, well, perhaps it's pertussis that's we're dealing with. But at that point, I didn't have the kits to do the swab for. So it's like, well, let's just treat this as I would anyways, with an antibacterial, antiviral, and things resolved. But so yes, it's just even that fine tuning piece. So yeah, I reading a vaccine insert is, I think a very important piece. You can get them on the internet. Some you have to make sure you're downloading the Canadian version, not the US version, when you search for that. But doing, there's still the piece of even with Tylenol, I really want people to stop using Tylenol before vaccines and after vaccines. And there's some good literature looking at how even Tylenol can reduce the effectiveness of the vaccine by doing that. So,
and so do you just recommend not doing that before and after vaccines as as to something to maybe soothe your child? Like, do you
right.
still feel okay about using it for fever and stuff like that?
I'll use it. Well, as a naturopathic doctor, I'll go to homeopathy.
Yes.
And I'll use herbs, but I have Advil on it. Advil will be there as something that, it's the fever is climbing. So we need to get it down. So I'll go to Advil over Tylenol. Tylenol in a secondary purpose of not using it is Tylenol can reduce glutathione storages quite rapidly. And so there's Tylenol in itself is something that we really need to be a little more cognizant about and reducing, not using it so liberally. There's children that have a decreased ability to break acetaminophen down. That's glutathione dependent. So this is where when you're doing vaccines, then even if they do Tylenol, I've got glutathione on board to help with that process if need be. And so, or that's all they have in the house and that's what they're using, but we have glutathione there. Because when you're low glutathione and you're using even Tylenol over and over and over and over and over again, there's research of looking at, well, there's a risk of increasing asthma as a result of that Tylenol use. So due to reducing glutathione storages. So
God, you're so knowledgeable. Thank you for sharing that. Like, I don't think this is like common knowledge that people just don't know. I don't know this. I'm totally honest that I don't know this stuff. So I'm so grateful to have this conversation with you for sure.
Well, it's a huge subject. I more dedicating more time to this subject than other things in my office, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that there's things that I don't see in my office anymore because this is where I'm going with I
Of
think,
course, of
yeah,
course.
and
I have
so
actually a couple a girl on here who I'm friends with is pregnant, and she has a couple of questions for you.
okay.
Um, she said, how do you feel about getting vaccines? Where am I looking here? I think I just lost her thing.
She's probably asking about doing vaccines during pregnancy.
Yeah, well, she's pregnant, and does it affect the baby?
So the safety studies in terms of vaccines during pregnancy looks at APGAR scores, and the studies have gone as far as 1 year at looking at the health of the child. There's really no way of knowing, does it affect the child when a child is born with high APGAR scores, then and you're like, well, okay, they're right now they're born healthy, and so there's some things can take a while to know. There's no way of knowing. The only way of knowing would be you did the vaccine in pregnancy, then you didn't do anything else, like no
Right.
other vaccines, shall we say, and followed those children for 2 to 3 years, and then see neurologically if it affected them. And that's the only way of know. But that hasn't been done. The studies go till 1 year. But of course, until 1 year, you're having other vaccines as well. So, I mean, it is more so it's stimulating the mother's immune system is what it's doing. So it's not working on the infant's immune system that way at all. It's the mother, because
Right.
you're going to do a DTaP vaccine in third trimester, so that it's a Tdap vaccine, it's a Boostrix or Adacel vaccine that you're doing to boost your body to make more antibodies to pertussis is why you're doing it.
Right.
So because the 2-month vaccine is the one that has pertussis in it. So you're making those antibodies to pass those antibodies through your breast milk until you do your 2-month vaccine is why you're doing it.
Interesting.
So, but
And she also said, as far this is another of her comments, is as far as kids getting extremely sick going to school and daycare now due to less and less people vaccinating their kids, is that something that you feel that there are more sick kids because they aren't vaccinating, and there's more of that like those breakouts happening at daycare or schools, or is it just been kind of consistent all along, and now people are starting to pay attention because it is such a hot topic?
could be that, social media. So now you can blast out all of your, what's going on. How did we really connect before? We were just in our own little bubbles, I suppose. But are kids sicker? Yes, kids are sicker these days. I mean, from what I see, the things that I see coming in, children can get, so the thing is that you want your child, this just sound interesting, but you do want your child to show symptoms of illness, because then we have an immune system that's working. And how are you going to know your immune system is working? Well, okay, when I never get sick, you do want to show some fever is good. Fever
Right.
is a good process. And so sick kids is okay. It's a matter of how long are they sick for. So I want to see that a child can resolve something within about 3 to 4 days. If your child is sick for 2 to 3 to 4 weeks, then there's something going on with their immune system there. They should be able to process that right through, because we are inundated from viruses and bacteria all day long, millions of them. And so that's okay if they get sick 2 to 3 times a year. That's okay. And a fever is okay to a point, certainly, but that heat is what kills the infection. You need that heat, because if you're going to suppress that heat, that infection's still there. And so now it gets to survive because you're just lowering the body temperature. And it's like, great, no problem. I'm going to continue thriving in this host. So don't allow that fever to happen. If your child is feeling a little unwell, fine, keep them home. And then you do all the other things that go along with that. But yes, children, I think today, there are reasons, other reasons that our children, I think, are sicker more often and longer, because yes, you're going to give sugar to your child constantly. You send them with a pop or juice boxes. Even just a quarter teaspoon is going to suppress their natural killer cells for 4 hours afterwards. So you are suppressing the effectiveness of their immune system by what you feed them. So water. I mean, you can go on a lecture just on nutrition with children, but that will affect it. Their gut health will affect their ability to deal with infections. 80% of their immune system, if not more, is in their gut. So we have got to make that, it is the epicenter. It is the second brain. I mean, you got to take care of that gut in and out. If your child is not pooping every day, there's one way to know. If they're hard to pass diarrhea, then that is something you've got to fix. And so, because you're going to affect the effectiveness of the immune system. Because the mucous membranes in your mouth, your nose, all the way down to your rectum, you've got the secretory IgA that all the way down. And so that is there to neutralize those antigens and get them out. If they're going to get through systemically, then now things are happening. Your body has to deal with that. So that's why this has to be healthy and happy. And so even fish oils are something that can help that, the pro-inflammatory side as well. They're anti-inflammatory. And so fish oils and probiotics are two really good things. Of course, fish oils for the brain too. So the gut, the food, the lack of sleep, the stress on the child, the lack of exercise. No one wants to hear this, but Wi-Fi is not a good thing. It is not healthy. I know people are going to disagree with that, but if you want to be informed, it is something that does need to reduce.
I watched the video on your page yesterday and I was like, oh my God, Ryan, you have to watch this. Like, oh, thank God we moved to the country, but nobody's safe. Like that's the thing, is that nobody's safe. And we have to start paying attention to this stuff because people are getting sicker and sicker and sicker and they don't know why, but there are reasons and they're ignoring those reasons.
Right. It's not a comfortable conversation to know, like, my Wi-Fi in my house is something that's not healthy for us. And 5G is coming out, which is different. And that is something that you do need to talk about. You do need to read about it. You do need to be informed and aware. And yeah, a lot of people are going to want to move into farms because they can get away from it and less of that exposure. And so, that it is important to be aware of, is to, if you want to know why you're sick, then you got to start doing the reading, understand, you got to start making those changes, or you're going to have sick children, depending on, the epigenetic change, your genes passed on, your gut health passed on, if you did a C-section or a vaginal birth, or you breastfed or not, all those things play a role in your kid's health. And so I don't have time for sick kids. So I do all the things I can do to keep them healthy as much as possible. My kids get sick, for sure they do, but I'm on the bounce back. And so I have other tools to help them, because what's interesting about even on the vaccine topic is, when you vaccinate, it doesn't protect you from all the other viruses and bacteria out there. And so one aspect that people will talk about is, I don't want to be around an unvaccinated child, right, because they're more infectious per se. I think that's where that thought process comes around. And I will disagree with that, because there's only 6 contagious communicable infections we vaccinate for. So there is Epstein-Barr virus, there's Coxsackie virus, there's RSV, the herpes family. There are so many other things within your environment that your vaccinated and unvaccinated child are equally exposed to and equally can pass those things. So, being around an unvaccinated child doesn't pose a risk, an elevated risk for a vaccinated child. And if your child has created those antibodies because you're worried about your child, you're worried about you. Yes, you're worried about the people that around you. I mean, I can't say we don't worry about everybody. You're going to worry about your own. And so having a vaccinated child that's created antibodies to that infection then is there to protect them against the infection in their environment. But they're going to be exposed to so many other things. Your child is still going to get sick even though you vaccinated, because there's all these other things they're exposed to. So that's how it happens. I mean, there's so many vaccines that we have, but there's so many infections around us. I mean, you talk about parasites. I mean, there's nothing to protect you against parasites. So I do want people to understand that notion, that yes, we have vaccines for certain things, but for very minute amount that is actually within our environment. So you can be
Absolutely.
getting sick from all those other things. And so when you do things to suppress your immune system, you are then susceptible to, for that infection to turn into to a problem. Yeah, it's about the susceptibility of the host. Are
So
you
it's
susceptible?
in all, like in general, it's just keeping a healthy immune system and healthy gut health is what it comes down to, right? For all of us, for, parents, for kids, for the people in our household, if we want to skip being really sick, people talk about the flu shot. And I look at my mom who was in healthcare for 18 years and had to get the vaccine every year as part of her job. And she is one of like the people that gets sick the most often. Not to say that she's not exposed to it more often because of what she did as a home care worker, but she was always sick and really bad. So it wasn't that she got the flu shot and she never got the flu.
Right.
Like that happened every year. So I never did. And I am less sick, but that's because I'm conscious of the food that we eat and the supplements we take and the things that we do to build that immune system. And that's really what the conversation should be about as well, on top of, are we going to vaccine or not, or vaccinate or not?
Sure. I mean, and even, optimization too, gut health in terms of even taking probiotics can increase the even effectiveness or long term of a vaccine as well. So probiotics are going to be part of my protocol in terms of pre-post vaccines, because I support a lot of families of what can I do before the vaccine, after the vaccine, to support and optimize my child for the vaccine. And so I do a lot of that kind of work with families, and in knowing if there's a proposed potential reaction in the past, what are we going to do to mitigate that? What signs are we going to look out for? And so we do that kind of work together, because they've chosen to do it, they want to do it, fine, and I will support you. And so, I mean, and what's interesting, even looking at surveillance of pertussis in the United States, the 50% of they were showing is 50% of the children, even between 0 and 6 months, had contracted pertussis. So 50% of the vaccinated had contracted pertussis based on the CDC's work with pertussis and their surveillance throughout the country. So knowing that is like, well, because even being vaccinated, you can still have the chance of contracting that infection. So that's why it's good to understand the infection. And then what would you do if your child got that infection? What would you do? What do you have at home to protect your child from that? So those are kind of things that we talk about as well. That thing, I like to have certain herbal, concoctions at home that are very strong in terms of antibacterial, antiviral that we'll take when we even travel. And so I don't know what we're going to be exposed to. No one does. You have no idea. So you have to do your due diligence, because being sick isn't fun. And if you are a susceptible host because you do have a lowered immune status, then you need to protect yourself from other things in your environment as well. Regardless if you think measles is in your environment, you've got other things that you've got to protect yourself against. That can be RSV sends so many infants into the hospital, and we don't have a vaccine for it. So, you be aware of that. And what would you do? So that's a thing. That's a piece that naturopathic doctors can really help you with, is what would I do to protect my child from this infection? Anything in my environment, because they seem to be more susceptible child to that based on the history of C-section, perhaps, didn't do vaginal seeding, wasn't able to breastfeed. So these kind of things. I mean, even having a smoker in your house increases the risk of contracting Hib, because you have more growth of Hib in your throat. So if you're breathing on your child and the husband is a smoker, or grandparents are a smoker, then you have to be aware of these things. So what is the risk of your higher risk and susceptibility?
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Bean. I really appreciate you taking the time today, because your perspective is very unique in that, you see both sides of the coin and you're going to do what's right individually for the person. And I really love having this conversation about education and looking into it, and not just expecting the government or your healthcare practitioner to have your back, but ask the questions that you need to make that informed decision so that you feel good about it. And that, like, I think that in general, when you make a decision, you better be 100% behind that decision, because if the decision goes sideways, you still got to stand in it.
Sure.
Right. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for taking
Oh,
the
you're
time. Is there
welcome.
anything else you would, if you were going to leave anybody with anything, or do you feel like we've covered everything?
Well, if you want to find me on social media, I'm on Instagram. So drtaylorbean.nd. And, I try to put some, information on there to help people. I just posted a little sheet that you can download. It's my top 5 questions that I get on vaccines. And, I'll be doing more of that as well. I do lectures, which I talk about the lectures that I'm going to, but typically they're for docs. And so, but certainly nurses can go to these conferences, healthcare practitioners, or maybe they're open. I'm not sure for some of these conferences. And I wrote, an article for the NDNR. If people want that article, I can send it over as well. Just on a different, it's for naturopathic doctors, but anyone can read it as well. Just different perspectives, timing of vaccine to titers, which we didn't talk about. You can do titers to check your immune status, and see, so I've had children that they'll do their first vaccine, and we check to see if they mounted immune response, and they did. So they're in the immune status based on titers. And so, there's this, it's a vast conversation. It's big.
It's complex. It's not an yes or no.
Totally. It is. And so, I have a lot of patients that vaccinate, and you have many that come that decided they're not going to vaccinate, and that is their decision even when they walk through the door. And so they want more information around the vaccine. I have couples that come in with different views, and so I had just simply will have these vaccine consultations of where do you stand, why do you want to vaccinate, why do you not want to vaccinate, and allow for that conversation to happen. And it's then two people can hear, in a safer space of, and having that third party sitting there, answering their questions is been a really, people will leave with, I think, more questions, but just the fact that there's this gap of inability to ask any questions. I think we really have to beef this piece up, because if you can't ask questions, there will be hesitancy. And so we need to have open dialogue, and think critically. So
I really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much for being here today. I know that there's so many comments. I know that people will come back and watch the replay and will be so excited to hear from you and hear your perspective. I'm so grateful that you took the time today. So thank you so, so much.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Okay. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, love.